name is Paige, and I'm the founder of Expat Education. I'm super excited to get started with you. This is the student teacher crash course. So you can comment below and yeah, get connected with people in this community. The goal is to have a growing global community that focuses on global education and how that interconnects with all of us. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, so thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited. I've been making different sessions for different groups of teachers and parents. I realized I did a session for first year teachers, and as much I would recommend that you watch it as a student teacher as well, because it's important to take on the role of a first year teacher and just kind of embody what that feels like. But for student teaching, I know that that is still a big learning curve for you as you're completing your college degree and getting more immersed with the students. So a lot of you, I'm sure, have a lot of experience with volunteering or just getting involved. Maybe you've been coaching or you've been mentoring or you've been tutoring. There's a lot of different ways to get involved. But this student teacher crash course is going to point out some other particular topics to think about as you start heading into a classroom. Okay, so the outline today will be doing a quick introduction of who I am and what Expat Education is all about. Then we'll be talking about identity, classroom management versus classroom culture, lesson design of experience, packing perspectives, the Expat Education platform of all the resources that you can access, and then staying connected with Expat Ed. So about me, my name is Paige. I'm from Michigan. I always wanted to be a teacher actually from first grade. I never really changed my mind. So I've just really dove into all the opportunities that education can bring. And that has led me to traveling a lot, which I'll share throughout this platform. But I love traveling and being in nature. I have so many memories of just being by myself in nature in places all over the world, very remote places, and just feeling so lucky to just observe the world around us. And so I'll say, as something that traveling has taught me, is to be really present with my thoughts and where I am and just paying attention. And you'll find as you're a teacher, this will come into play of just really being observant of who you're with. And those are your students every single day. You're going to watch them grow a lot. So just being mindful of, encouraging great habits with them, such as being in nature because it's really calming, but just being really inclusive with experiences. I did my student teaching in Michigan and Australia. You'll find that as you go to different schools, or if you branch out to go to different states or different countries with different organizations or different schools, you're going to find a lot of similarities and differences. That's normal, right? We're always looking at how we can improve and how we can learn from other people. So I'll share more about that throughout this platform of just those global experiences. But with these experiences, they've added up to me teaching and mentoring in 10 different countries. And that just brings a lot of diversity into perspective. And that's really, really, really important as you become a student teacher for you being a bridge into modern education. You are entering a workforce where children have way more global access than ever. And as much as I love traveling, I really want to help you as I continue to grow, to be an educator, to really show what this looks like in a healthy way, not through scrolling on social media or thinking we're doomed by watching the news, but really bringing to perspective all of the different voices in our world. And it's a really beautiful thing. So I'll continue to share that. And then the biggest takeaways that I've learned from teaching abroad from so many different schools would be to how to teach minimally, how to focus on students' interactions, prioritize experiences over materials, and integrate a global scope. So just to sum this up, I've worked in a lot of different places that hardly sometimes had Wi-Fi. If there was too much wind, for example, if I was in Galapagos, sometimes it would just be windy and we just lost our access to YouTube and the internet, which is really funny. It can be really frustrating if you've planned something all about using, a resource online, but it really is grounding to know that things will always happen, especially if you're student teaching, just getting used to that fact that you'll plan things and they won't go according to plan. That's okay. But then also when I was working in Fiji, I was in the highlands and we didn't have Wi-Fi, we didn't have any service. Even if you had a phone plan, you did not have service. And so we'd go to this like hill. You had to walk like 20 plus minutes up a hill to a lookout point, and you'd hold up your phone and hope that some messages went through. And so these are moments that you realize that with or without Wi-Fi, you are interacting with children or people in general, and that there's always going to be these learning moments. There's going to be frustrating moments. There's just going to be bonding moments of like, I can't believe this is happening, or, this is so great, and all of the emotions. So getting comfortable with emotional regulation as well as you're entering the classroom. There's going to be a lot of feelings throughout the year. So these are just some big takeaways that I think as a student teacher, you can just really slow down and start to prioritize what these interactions really mean. And if you watch the first year teacher training that I did, I do talk a lot more about experiences over materials. But just to sum that up, it would just be like having a smart board is the material, right? But the experience is what happens with the smart board, right? So there's good things that it looks innovative and interesting. So students really want to touch the board and see what's going on. But the actual experience could be that you have one student participating and you have 24 students watching, and that's not super fun to just keep waiting and watching, but you have to make it interactive. So how can you incorporate more interaction with these smaller moments? And so that's just one example. So keep this in mind as we continue throughout this session, just because the experience is everything, and I'm excited to share more about that with you. And that's why I created Expat Education. So this kind of happened accidentally when I was teaching in 2020 during quarantine. I was a virtual teacher for fourth graders, and you'll see in the map picture here, these were my students, and they were so brave throughout the year, just continually showing up each day virtually. And we learned so much together. And that was a year that was very strange, right? There's so much isolation and a lot of just reflection of what's going on. And so that was a moment when I started these videos. I'll share more about the global conversation videos. But when I started doing these global conversation videos, which is the basis of this platform, is having global scope and access and genuine, authentic conversation. But I would show a video every day with my students and we would talk about it. And I'll continue to explain throughout this session and platform that this does connect to curriculum. So just as one example, if you are teaching elementary school, having an opinion is something that you grow into, right? Like you're deciding what you think and what you believe and what you value. And then the older that you get, the more you have to justify it, right? So from elementary school, from noticing and observing, you get more complex with having rationales to explain your thought process and then all the complexities with that. So we'll get more into this, but this is kind of the big picture of expat education, which shows a global scope. So in the picture with the bananas, banana filter, that was back in 2017. So filters have been around for a while. The technology has been developing so much. And I just think that right now it's the fastest it's ever been as we think about ChatGPT and all of the AI agents that are now available for people. So just come to terms as a student teacher that you are going to have such a wide range of experience, whether that's with tech, with whatever you are talking about, there's going to be such a range of experiences, which is what we value, is just understanding the different perspectives of other people. So yeah, that was my 5-year-old host sister. So I lived in Italy for a summer, and every 2 weeks I would change families, and then I would change cities, and I would just teach for 2 weeks in a different city around Italy, which was so special and so fun. Italians are so welcoming, and yeah, we just had the best time. And then under that picture, I was teaching or mentoring high schoolers in Fiji. And so we would travel and we got to do some volunteer work in the highlands. And then we also got to jump islands and go to different places. And so these women really taught me this like beautiful strength of, yeah, just being so motherly. When I'm traveling, I'm very far away from my family, and these women are just so strong and so thoughtful. And, they would feed us every day and just teach us so much about what their life is like. And we, as teachers, really need to model what that looks like, of giving attention to other people to learn from them. Not just being a transactional interaction, but actually really embodying these strong characteristics of people that we meet. We always want to be learning. So Yeah, that was in Fiji. And then in the middle, the other middle, the other middle picture, I'm at a pier, and this is in Galapagos in Ecuador. These were my students where once a month we would go down to the pier and go talk to tourists. And so when I talk about interactions, I know that you can't just take your students out whenever you want. This was a small community and it was planned by the school, and all the parents gave the okay. But having that real world interaction changes the game of what we're learning. So, for example, if I was teaching about sustainability and, questions, who, what, where, when, why, how, we got to talk to tourists of, what does recycling look like in Germany? Or how do you recycle? Or, what's your sustainable habits when you live in England, right? And our habits will change and our access will change depending on where we are. But these types of moments of, really practicing real world situations by interacting with people is something that I will encourage you to do, which is why I encourage the global conversation videos, because I know we don't have guest speakers as much anymore, or we don't have field trips as much anymore, but we really still need to be proactive to get that real world engagement. And so that was something that's very special with my students too. It's not just about the content. You'll realize this as a student teacher. It's not just about the content, it's about the interaction yet again, right? Where they notice, oh, like certain age adults don't like it when we ask, how old are you? But other certain age adults don't mind. They didn't even think twice about the question, right? So it's interesting to think about like what you say and how people respond. Life is a lot of interacting, right? It's a lot of kind of psychology of understanding why people reply how they do and understanding your perspective and theirs. And there's just a lot of engagement there. So keep that in mind because social skills are really important for kids to practice in general. To build community in your classroom, you really want that relatability to be very transparent. So keep that in mind as well. And then on the top right, I was teaching in Bali for the summer, and I had students from Italy, China, and South Korea, but this picture was just with my South Korean students. And so it really shows you that children around the world are learning, which is also the baseline platform for expat education, that children are, really just growing so much. They're interacting with kids all over the world. Like none of these kids knew each other. And then they came for 2 weeks. And then every 2 weeks again, this is kind of a trend with ESL is every 2 weeks you change. And so they're really immersed and get to learn so much. And then they build this confidence of meeting new people, having new ideas. And then look at they're presenting in front of like 50 people. And then the last picture here is not in a classroom. I was not teaching. I was just traveling. But I think it really shows this beautiful moment of still connecting with people, even in real life. So I actually had like a back and ankle injury years ago, and I was feeling really weak and not confident in most things that I did. And so I was following to get to this waterfall in the Philippines, and the boy that led us there, he could tell that I was a little bit scared and almost frustrated because there's like it's one thing to be logically sure about something, like I'll be okay walking on rocks, but physically you might feel differently. And it was just such a beautiful moment that he offered his hand to walk with me, and I didn't ask him to do that. And so there's these small moments that we also want to point out with students of like those moments of kindness really, really, really matter. And we might not always know how much it impacts somebody. So this boy did not know that I have had so many times of crying over the fact that I couldn't walk as well, or I wasn't as strong as I used to be, or, there's so much that someone goes through that we can really just reflect in these moments of actual interaction of giving someone our time and space that learning is not just in the classroom. So also I would recommend based off of that explanation right there, I did a series of conversations about change, and one of those is modern education. And the topic of modern education means that we need to think about learning in every interaction that we have so that students become really used to going after what they're interested in, asking questions, finding people that will be there for them, teach them, mentor them, just interact with them, and that they can learn, like a sponge to start filtering in what's helping them and what's not, right? We don't need to absorb everything that we hear. So that's just based on photos of my explanation with expat education. So let's look at some videos. So more with expat education, you'll see on the bottom here, point of view, consistent conversation. Okay, so with the global conversation videos that I have talked about briefly, I'll share more later on or as we keep going actually, and we'll do an actual practice one. But for student teaching, especially for your first week of school, you want it to be immersive. You want it to be life-changing, right? I had students who told me the nicest things, which I'm sure this is going to happen to you too, of like, you've changed my life, you gave me so much kindness. Like, students are going to connect with you differently with you than your host teacher and then their previous teachers, right? Like every teacher has such an authentic personality that brings out different parts of students. And so the more that you can bring out in students of their inner voice or how they see the world, how they can express themselves, the more impactful you will be, which is why I've created this platform to bring conversation to the classroom, right? Global conversation. So it's all based on real world experience of traveling. So throughout the global conversation videos, you'll be traveling with me, I think, across 10 different countries. And then there's digital mentors that are included with that too. So they get to learn from people all over the world. But for the first week of school, to really drive that connection with who your students are. So they know they have access. Just thinking of elementary school, they just talk about such different things because they have different access than when we were younger. And we really want to promote interactions through understanding what that global access really means, right? And again, it's not scrolling on social media, it's not judging people based on how they look or what they don't do. It's really just focusing on our life experiences and how that ranges from people around the world. So keep that in mind with the global conversation video module that you can just like turn on this clip and you start to travel with me. You start having this routine of conversation and thinking globally and then reflecting within oneself to think, I agree, I don't agree. There's different opinions they'll create and then relating to people around them. And the more that you bring up diverse topics and global scope, the more they'll realize between each other, like, oh, I agree with this person on this topic, but not with this topic, and then this topic and this topic. And there's so many things that we talk about and we experience that I really want to just bring that to your classroom. And that will be really fun as you're a student teacher and you really want to start off with this momentum. Momentum is so important. We don't want to feel this dryness all like because we're overwhelmed with fear. But I really am so passionate about this platform because I know it will bring just a different type of connection with your students. So I know that student teaching will feel fast and busy and crazy, which is the plus side of the global conversations is that you don't need to prepare anything. You don't need to create worksheets. You don't need to plan the outcome, right? The idea is that you are immersing with curriculum based on what you're teaching, right? If they need to introduce a topic in writing, then it's like, well, then how can you introduce your idea to, when you talk about traveling to Taiwan? Or when you learn about sharks in Australia, how do you introduce that, right? We're always introducing something, whether it's to a friend or to a coworker, to family, to somebody, right? And so it's not just an introduction for a writing piece in second grade. We really want to have this expansive connecting experience, like a shared experience, a shared global experience, because children have that access. And this will just be very fluid and authentic because you get to have somebody consistent who is me supporting you always with how you pair your teaching style with that. Like some of you wouldn't go to places that I would, or some of you wouldn't do things that I would. But I feel that way about other people, right? If they are, a skydive instructor for their job, I just couldn't imagine jumping out of a plane 20 times a day, right? There's just like, there's things that people do that they love that you wouldn't do, right? And that's something that we can share as a teacher, that students aren't just getting to know us and our personalities, but we're actually a bridge for them to understand the bigger picture out there. So, in conclusion of this long expat education introduction, I encourage you to slow down time when you have those morning meetings, or when you have afternoon meetings, or when you're really looking to connect with your students through community building, for them to know you, for you to know them, for them to know each other, etc. Then I really encourage you to slow down these moments, because in one of these videos it says you've got the compass within you to lead you through every route in life, is that we're all going different directions and we can be really transparent with that through experiences and through conversation. And just know that those small moments add up so drastically. And you'll see that as students gain momentum, gain confidence, gain competence, global competence in which they can really just relate to the world around them, that is going to be one of the most positive impacts that you could have as a student teacher. So for identity, we're going to think about it in person and digital, which is kind of crazy, but it is different, right? So if we think about communication styles, somebody in person might communicate differently than they do online. Maybe we've noticed that, right? So reflect for yourself of like, what are you like in person and what are you like digitally? And then know that children are also processing life and interactions in this way as well, whether they have social media or not. Their parents are impacted by this, of what they're dealing with, or their friends, or the older they get. We just really want to prepare them with these communication styles. And so it's like, are you more passive? Are you more assertive? Are you passive aggressive? There's so many ways to communicate that we really just want to be transparent in our conversations of like, oh yeah, we don't always communicate the same way. Like if you're frustrated, you might talk like this. But if you're really calm, you might talk like this. But if you're just preparing them for these moments. And so I'll talk about more about this throughout the courses and resources that Expat Education has, but just to like really start processing what these conversations and reflections look like. You might want to think about your interests and personality, your nationality, your citizenship, your strengths and talents, your hopes and fears, your reputation, your learning and growth moments, your languages, family, friendships, etc. There's so many things that make you who you are and that they might be portrayed differently in person and online, okay? And I say nationality and citizenship because what this global conversation will do is to share, like, oh, we seems like we all think the same, but actually we don't because we're given more expansive scope on talking points. Like if you moved from Brazil to Ireland, or if you were a teacher abroad, or if you've worked in 20 countries, right? Like we have different opinions about different topics. We just need to have exposure to those topics. And so I've taught in a lot of different schools with teachers from all different countries. And then the students are either from that country or they're coming in from other countries. And then our world is really globally diverse, and all those opportunities are very common. But if you're not exposed to what that looks like, then these global conversation videos will really help you. And if you are working in a place that is already quite diverse, then this will really represent what that looks like at a global scale of how we can connect those differences into a conversation. And then I could elaborate on all of these, but just keep this in mind of being transparent of we have different experiences and we have different interests, and those strengths and weaknesses actually come together to create a very solid team, which is what you're trying to do with your classroom. When I'm teaching, especially when I was teaching virtually and really just trying to draw in all of the attention because all you had was the screen, I really needed to point out strengths and like these growth moments of like how we can come together of this student and this student and this student, and like really highlight and just be transparent about what I don't know. Like I could look this up, or I want to look into this, or I want to learn from so and so. Your students are going to know more things than you do on certain topics. Like that's a given, right? And same with everybody. So just really amplifying those moments to highlight all there is to learn from each other and the world around us. And then values. So I'll just read them off here and start to reflect on maybe your top three values: accountability, courage, integrity, creativity, gratitude, authenticity, adaptability, loyalty, curiosity, honesty, dependability, humility, altruism, generosity, kindness, beauty, boldness, family, forgiveness, achievement, adventure, balance, freedom. Okay, there's so many that maybe you're thinking, well, I value so many of these things. But when it comes down to it, people are going to remember you for like the top three, right? And what are those top three for you? So you can pause here and do a reflection really quick of this identity part. And when you're ready to move on, I'm just going to give you an example of a value and what that looks like. So, to adapt as a student teacher, let me talk about adaptability. And this is also something from traveling that I feel so strongly about because we are constantly needing to adapt to our surroundings and the different contexts that we encounter. But to be a student teacher, we are learning to pivot, right? Pivot, pivot, pivot. You're going to grow, you're going to stay grounded, and you're going to respond depending on who your student is, depending on what the topic is. There's just going to be so many factors that we're going to continue learning. So as a student teacher, give yourself a lot of grace to know that this is just a learning curve. And even if it's your first year teaching, there's going to be a learning curve. Your fifth grade teaching, there's going to be a learning curve. There's always going to be a learning curve because children are growing up in a different way than how we did. And we just need to adapt to these different situations. Adapting is a daily skill, it's a mindset, and it's really a marker of emotional intelligence. So if I think about it with traveling, I don't go somewhere and then I expect them to think like me, or I don't expect them to act like me, or I don't expect them to live like me, right? We just can't expect people to think like us and then judge the other side, right? Oh, they should be like this, or they should be like this, or this should be like this, right? There's a lot of processes that we might think about of how something could be better, or something could be easier, or something could be whatever, but we really need to adapt to what the circumstances are, right? And that means we adapt. And so, for just as an example, these are the global conversation videos. And just from the videos that we've seen so far, there's been people from Italy, Argentina, the US. There's so many different places and so many different people we can learn from, but I wouldn't speak to them the same, right? Like the people who live in Argentina but moved to Italy, but then temporarily moved to United States, they have a totally different story and something that I could learn so differently than somebody who's from Morocco, for example. And then, they have their whole story of all the places they've been and worked, right? And so we just really need to appreciate someone's story instead of judge it, right? Really just dive into how can we learn from other people because people are so inspiring and we can't do everything, although social media might trick us into that, but we can really learn from people's stories. And that's what I'm trying to share with adaptability is like showing that transparently as often as you can. Like this is my friend he's from Venezuela. We met in Ecuador, but he's in this video talking about how he learned English through playing video games. And now he was working at a hostel. And so he was speaking, Spanish and English. And now he works in Spain and he does trips with people, but really understanding like where language can take you. Those are opportunities that without giving that exposure of what language, just the topic of language will do, then we can really see all the places we can go. This is my friend Maria. She's from Peru, and we met in Italy in our master's program. And she talks about learning four different languages and progressing with Italian, French, Spanish, and English. So, this is just a snapshot into what the opportunities look like for expat education in these videos. And then, as far as student teaching and just coming back to yourself, just always thinking about that reflection process. Be adaptable with feedback. So figure out how you can process, what went well, what didn't go well, what you want to do next. Just adapt to what that looks like. Stay curious, stay steady, stay flexible, and stay responsive. That will help you adapt to so many different situations. Okay, classroom management versus classroom culture. I have three categories here. Let's start with BBB. Boundaries plus belonging equals behavior. You're not just managing behavior, you're creating space where people feel seen and safe. Okay, so I think that teaching has progressed in a way that I hope that we're not taking behavior personally from students because they're truly dealing with so much at home and just in their lives that you are creating this space for them to come and learn. And so the topics of trauma and behavior management and like what your school will do, they have their own protocol. I'm not going to dive too heavy into that, but just as far as the expat education platform, knowing that your communication skills matter to create those boundaries, right? When you don't feel safe, like just creating those moments of speaking up for yourself, that's a lot of practice. That takes a lot of practice. And so with the communication skills that expat education prioritizes, that's just one very important one, right? And that you can create boundaries with people that you see similarly with or differently. And that creates community of respecting each other's boundaries. But then also belonging, knowing that you can think differently and that you're still more than welcome in the classroom and that we'll find something that we see differently on every single day, just as we will find things similar. Okay. And that type of environment is the classroom culture, and that will impact the behavior. Not to say that's like the only way, because there's going to be so many strategies that you try and that work for you or that don't work for you. And so, but just keep that in mind of like, if things are starting to unravel of behavior or of chaos, it happens, right? That sometimes the kids can be so distracted, or you feel so distracted, or there's just too much going on. Really just always come and boil this back down into like that belonging and that sense of boundaries of like what are we really here for? School is to teach us to think for ourselves, to consider those around us, and to connect with the greater world around us, because that's where the opportunities are, right? Especially when we think about the digital world and how much they have to access in the future that we just didn't have when we were younger, okay? I keep saying that, but it's just so true. Another category here is positive routines. And so I know that your school will have different protocols, like I've said, but just thinking about this, because when I've worked in different countries, I've just really picked up different tricks and different ways to connect in those small moments that do create those positive routines. And the more that you're, normalizing these conversations of just we're always communicating, we're always trying to learn, we're always trying to connect, right? Then you can just start to incorporate these tricks and these ideas as a way that students can become more resourceful. And so one of them is coordination. So coordination is really that mind-body connection that we really want to show in these positive routines, because we want to stay connected with our mind and body of what feels good, of what doesn't feel good, of what we think, of what we don't think, and having that be really transparent in our conversations. And then just have it be fun, like when you're waiting in line to stand on one foot, or to do a partner coordination. You could create different shapes. There's just so many ways to include movement in a world that I know they have so much screen time and sitting time. Another one is posture. When I was teaching in China, I realized that this was one of my top rules that the school encouraged, because it really impacts your attention. So if I'm slouched and I'm like looking away, I don't have the same ability to focus if my body's relaxed, I'm not looking, I'm not paying attention, right? Students might think like I hear the teacher talking, but until they're sitting well, which was my top three rules, was one of those, that was one of them, is sitting well. And anytime I would say sitting, they would say well, or in the beginning I would say sitting well, and that's like a reminder, but I like to include them in the rules. If it's speak, they would say English, like we want to get in positive routines of how we connect in the classroom. But the sitting well part, I just went from like this tiredness to like this attention oriented posture. And so whether that means you stand up and you move your body and then you sit back down straight, you might need to just keep reminding them what that posture really looks like. Okay. And then breathing. I know I'm elaborating a lot on this, but just from somebody who's worked in a lot of different countries with a lot of different kids, there's a lot of different strategies. And breathing is a big one, where you might want to breathe in 1, 2, 3, 4, out 1, 2, 3, 4. And so when you have these example videos of global conversations, if you're thinking about somebody who was in the Coast Guard, one of the people you saw in the video was working in the Coast Guard, and he went through a hurricane. And so there's a lot of like reasons to think outside of yourself and to breathe, right? Or if we think about a firefighter, if we think about all these different jobs that have so much risk to them, we really want to think abstractly here, where it's not just our lives that we need to, oh, like this happened to me and I don't need to breathe because that's just life, right? But if we are able to step back from our day to day and we think bigger of other people in a way that's really important, like we really need to ground ourselves with breathing in and out, or maybe two in, one out, whatever you're trying to work on with your students. But talking about breathing, I would talk about this with my students all the time of either breathing or getting outside or just positive routines. But the breathing part really calms you down, which I'm going to get to this in just one moment of why we do that before correction. But breathing really brings you back to the present moment, okay? And I'll explain that in just a second. And then just one more concept here of the head, heart, stomach alignment. So things that happen when we talk about situational awareness through the global conversation videos is that a lot can happen and or something could happen and we might think differently than how we feel and our gut might be telling us something different. Okay. And just as one example, as I'm home in Michigan right now visiting family and really reflecting on how I grew up, which was boating and tubing and being at the beach all the time. And it's just such a healthy way to be outside and get to know people. But for tubing, let's just give an example where you're behind a boat and you're going fast. And so logically, you'd be like, oh, given this circumstance, there's a good driver, I have a life jacket, I am a good swimmer, and there's not that many boats out today. So logically, it makes sense, right? But then with your heart, your feelings, you might be really scared. Like, not everybody likes to go really fast on a tube, right? Where we feel differently about things. And then your stomach will say, okay, either it's going to depend on the person, right? But your stomach would be like, okay, maybe take a risk this time and trust the driver and try something new and step outside your comfort zone. And if you don't feel safe, then change your mind. We can always change our mind, right? Or in a different scenario, maybe the driver isn't a good driver. Maybe you don't have a life jacket. Maybe it's really busy and maybe you're not a good swimmer. It's not logical to go because it's really dangerous, right? But then your heart might be like, well, I love risk, right? Or, your heart saying, okay, yeah, that actually makes sense. Like, I don't feel safe or I don't feel comfortable, right? Sometimes that's in line. And then your stomach will be like, and your gut, listening to these intuitions of like, what should I really do here? If it's so overall not safe, you're going to learn to trust your instincts of why, right? And really processing that. So that's just one example where, again, when we use these videos, then we have different experiences. So in one of the videos, one of my friends moves from Brazil to Ireland so he could practice English. So his first language is Portuguese, right? So logically, it makes sense to go to a different country to practice a language in immersion, right? And then, but your heart might be like, oh my gosh, people treat me differently. I don't feel that great. I'm not confident. I'm not good at English, right? But your intuition, your gut is saying, hey, it's going to be hard right now, but then you're really going to meet a community that accepts you for who you are, and you're going to grow so much in your opportunities because you can learn to speak English well, right? That's another idea of like talking through those moments. And so maybe you want to, do these testers with your students where it's like mind, body, stomach connection of when it feels in line and when it doesn't. But really talking about these different experiences is going to help your children regulate their emotions, which brings us to if we're constantly doing this in conversation and reminding them that we're human and we don't always know the right way and we always don't do the right thing, right? But if we're going to co-regulate using these positive routines before correction, so if a student is dysregulated, this will happen, right? With screen time and stress and all these things, they might feel upset, shut down, overstimulated, angry, anxious, and they're not really even sure what to do with themselves, right? So they might have trouble managing feelings and emotions, okay? So if they feel stressed, they might just get violent because like that just takes over their prefrontal cortex, which is their decision making and their social behavior, right? The amygdala is this flight or flight part of your brain, and when that gets really activated, you're not going to have much progress of correction if you're fighting against something that's not present with you, right? And so talking these things through, like when I was teaching virtually and my students would really start to shut down if their Wi-Fi was slow or if they got cut out for a moment, right? They take things seriously, right? That's their reality, and they're feeling like they're falling behind or that they missed something or that they'll be unprepared, right? There's a lot of feelings like the 10-year-old has, and like there's a lot of feelings that a 7-year-old has because their reality is that, right? Their reality is like being checked in with class or not. And so we just want to take this seriously that their moments of big emotions are real for them and they need to regulate that. So you really want to be co-regulating that with these examples of like, if we go back to that example of my friend from Brazil going to Ireland, it's like if he is in a job interview and he forgets a word in English, is he going to throw the chair and yell at the people? Or is he just going to breathe, take a moment and talk around the word? Because you know what? That happens. We don't all have the right vocabulary at the right time. Okay. So that's just one example of how you can just make these so inclusive, these experiences, because we are human. And, thinking about that human connection of learning from mistakes and making the best decision for yourself is something that we can practice, and that will be included with the global conversation video module. And then example. Okay. So let's do a teach practice point of view. So we'll do this on the next slide, but just realize that everyone's going to have a different point of view on a situation, right? Whether that means they're right or they're wrong, or there's just different ways to approach a situation, right? Let's try this. Let's try one. So write down what you would do for this scenario. What questions do you have? What can you look up to prepare for those questions? So you're teaching and you need to teach and learn, right, in these moments of teaching, how to read the energy in the room and shift accordingly. Okay, just because you have a perfect lesson plan does not mean that the children who are either dysregulated or distracted or just, immature in the way that of their behavior they're still young and learning, right? So you are going to need to shift depending on what, and again, adapt to what this energy is in the room. And so let's practice. There's case studies like you planned a writing lesson, but half the class is dysregulated. What now? Okay, this happens. Okay, and you are going to need to decide in these moments, I'm either going to start half the class to get started, and then I'm going to talk to this half, or you're going to say, hey, I'm going to bring this all together because we really need to be on the same page here. Or there's just a few who are causing the bigger dysregulation, the disruption. So you need to prioritize just a few individuals to talk about, what's happening. There's so many variables in these situations that it's helpful to practice it, whether you meditate and you just kind of think about these moments of when you feel overwhelmed and what you do and how you respond, or however you help process your own emotions and decision making. But then point of view. Maybe you'll agree, maybe you won't. But if if the student hasn't learned, the teacher hasn't adapted. Okay, so maybe as a teacher, you're saying, well, hey, I'm doing everything I can do, and they're still not listening, they're still not trying, they're still not this, they, right? But then from a parent's perspective, they might say, hey, like that is my child. If they are, this way, you need to adapt to who they are, right? And thus, if my student isn't learning, you're not adapting. And that is just, two different perspectives. We didn't even include like the classmates, parents, friends, point of view, or administration's point of view, or your parents' point of view, right? You can know that you're really trying, but then really adapting to what is going on in the classroom. So just keep that in mind. Maybe you want to pause here and reflect of a different situation, but thinking about the behavior and really being proactive about that is something that's going to really help you thrive as a student teacher. All right, lesson design, experience. Okay, so like I've said before, experiences over materials any day, all day, even if it's a virtual experience. You'll see in the videos here, I'm in Taiwan, I'm in Galapagos, I'm diving, I'm on a plane, I'm on a scooter. There's just so much to be able to learn from other people's experiences and to find the beauty in the world around us, right? Like we think differently, we have different cultures, we have different languages, we have different day-to-day routines, and that is a beautiful thing. We have different access to nature, we have different priorities, we see different things, right? We have different opportunities, right? And that's just really important as part of a learning experience to know that you have options. What we don't want is like this narrow-minded way of thinking because it really cuts you out from connecting with other people and other places. So for the courses, I'll explain more about these soon, but we have the Global Conversation video module, which is something that I've been talking about a lot throughout this session. And that's really focusing on conversation and routine with global scope. Okay. And this is not just focusing on me and my travels. It's actually putting a lot on you as a teacher and the students to react, to form an opinion, to think bigger, and to get into habit of what that looks like. So we talk about things like having an open mind, enjoying the small moments of life, enjoying the ride, to having basic to advanced conversations where we think about questions and observations, which is kind of that bare minimum of having a conversation, to getting more advanced, which is including different emotions or having multiple emotions or having situational awareness or thinking locally to globally. There's a lot of different ways that I support you throughout that course. And then the MCB is Meaningful Conversations with Children Blueprint, Vocabulary Basics. And that's geared for kindergarten through fourth grade teachers and parents. So if you are finding that you want to connect more with parents, then I would really recommend that course so that everyone's on the same page. It talks about curriculum, it talks about modern education vocabulary. So it's an academic approach, but it's also a practical approach so that that course, the Meaningful Conversations Blueprint, includes the global conversation videos. So you can either buy the GCV, Global Conversation Videos. That's just for K-8. So if you're kindergarten through eighth grade, that's available. But then if you're focusing K-4, you could get that included there. So I'll show you what that looks like soon. And then the content is point of view, always a different perspective, right, of traveling and teaching. So this is what I love to do, and that's what I've loved to do for a very long time. But thinking about perspectives, point of view, perspectives, perspectives, perspectives. And so what you'll be doing a lot as a teacher is thinking about first person, second person, and third person, right? So if it's first person, it's my experience. These are my videos. You can tell that they've impacted me in a big way of who I am today, right? First person. And that, something that I have felt is way more intense because I felt it in my body. Like stress could be fast heartbeat, and what my firsthand experience is different than yours, right? So maybe me diving would be different than your experience diving, right? So that's first person. So you're really going to go into like how personal these experiences are. And then the second person, so if you're having a conversation with someone, so what we're really trying to promote is like trying to understand the other person. So how do you feel when, or what did you think when, or you, right? We want to have that perspective of like you and then first person me. What do I think? What do you think, right? And that back and forth. And we don't always have to agree, but these perspectives are really important. And then the third person is if we have more people in the conversation, we can say he, she, they, right? And that's that outside perspective of like having kind of like that bird's eye view. And so that first, second, third person experience connects to curriculum so well based on, reading, writing analysis, all that stuff. But I'll share more through the curriculum, but really thinking about first, second, third person for the content. And then conversations, as I've mentioned many, many times so far, is connection plus curriculum. So this will be community building concepts, and this thinks about the entire individual. It's not just like what they need to know for curriculum to pass a test. We know that there's a lot of standardized testing. There's a lot of data that we need to show what the students are learning, but really thinking fully, wholeheartedly about a student is like, their emotional development, their social engagement. So keep that in mind with when you are designing lessons is like, again, interaction and experience over anything. Okay, how are you creating critical thinking scenarios? How are you promoting them to grow and be brave with things that they're not comfortable with, right? Like public speaking. They need to practice speaking in small groups or speaking in class to be prepared to think of them in front, right? All of these are baby steps. So you just need to feel comfortable and competent and thus confident. So keep that in mind when you're designing your lessons. Pack perspective, travel perspective here. We are always going to be packing more and more and more perspectives, right? Even without watching this session, you have input from this professor, this friend, that friend, that family member, that family member. And when you go to professional development, it's going to seem like you need to know everything, and there's always so much to learn, and it might feel overwhelming. So besides what I've focused on so far, here's another list of things to think about. But remember, you don't have to unpack them all at once. To be a student teacher that thrives, you're going to be very present as to how you can pick and choose what you need to focus on. And teachers, even if they haven't been student teaching, if they've been teaching for a long time, that's going to help them be a successful, thriving teacher. So just some more perspectives to think about, just as like, a mindset shift of how you can focus before you get started would be assessment with purpose. So thinking about formative versus summative, student self-assessment and reflections versus grades. You're going to learn how to prioritize that. Not right now, but you will as time goes on. So keep this in your back pocket. Another topic is mindset, feedback, and lifelong learning. So, how to receive and use feedback, which we've kind of touched on, right? And then your own continued education. So, again, this semester or year will be hectic, it'll be busy, and you're going to be creating a lot. So, also staying inspired, because I know that you're showing up every day to inspire your students and do the best you can. But then also, there is this fuel of learning that keeps us motivated. I'm always listening to podcasts or reading and just trying to get involved because when I feel like I can't create anymore or whatever it is, like it's really helpful to learn from others. And that mindset shift is helpful. So you might look into different books, podcasts, travel, and resources, but always know that expat education is helpful too to support you in these moments. Technology in the classroom is another one, which I'm sure you know from AI, digital tools, and mindful use. Again, wherever you're working, I'm sure has a protocol of, what that looks like for your school. But really keep in mind, as we keep talking about the whole individual, know that your students are developing with a crazy amount of access. And, different schools will have different rules of what's accessible, which is okay, but really keeping that in mind of like having a conversation that speaks globally. It's like, again, we have different resources, we have different skills. Some people will like AI, some people will not, and some businesses will use it, some will not. How we communicate is with these digital tools sometimes. So just keep that in mind of like bringing these to light in conversation so it feels like you're part of something bigger, which is like what's functioning in the world around you. Also, cultural responsiveness is a good topic to think about. This is included in the Meaningful Conversations Blueprint. I talk about cultural competency and global citizenship and just having this response of, knowing that there's something more than our own culture out there, right? And just to dive into that with curiosity. Creative teaching tools. I'm excited for you to figure out what works for you, and you'll be doing a lot of creating this year, so enjoy. And then thinking about co-teaching, collaboration, working with administration and other staff. So again, you are going to be adapting depending on who you're working with and what they're talking about. And, how do you thrive with other teachers and what can you teach them? What can they teach you? There's so much to think about with perspectives. So just keep this in mind, put it in the suitcase, compartmentalize it, zip it up, figure out how you want to digest all of these topics. But, just think that there's, always a lot to learn and just give yourself grace through these learning moments. Okay, so the Expat Ed platform, there's a lot to access with us, and these links are in the video description, so you can screenshot it just to give yourself the big picture here, or just check out the links and get connected with us. So the first one I've talked about, the Global Conversation video courses. In the next slide, I'll show you an actual example of what I'm talking about, but also there are live and recorded options. So of course, the recorded option is helpful for you as a teacher to bring this in to class when you have the time or when you prioritize it, because remember, it does connect to the bigger picture of curriculum. But I also provide live classes. So if your students are looking for more personalized support, I do group and private lessons. Also for the Meaningful Conversations Blueprint course, this is for kindergarten through fourth grade, like I've mentioned, but also for teachers and parents. So again, you can extend this bridge because what will make your job easier will be that the parents are understanding what is expected of their child and just having that bridge of interaction. Like I keep talking about interactions, it's not just with your students, but also for parents to feel involved. And then I also provide coaching. So for student teachers, first year teachers, teacher teams, if you're looking to elevate your teaching teams or your own personal development this year, I would love to show up for you and show you this global competency. So actually sharing real world experiences and relating. We need to be able to relate. That's going to be such a strong skill socially, especially when we're interacting with people all over the world. Like whether it's through social media, through potential jobs, through our news, through sporting events, right? There's just so much access in so many different ways. So I would love to help coach you with that. And that's also, there's links for everything, like I've said, but that's a form you can fill out and we'll get connected. And then speaking and trainings, I would love to connect with schools and administration or whoever is looking to really elevate the education perspective. So my passion topic is modern education via global competency. So I am a very firm believer that as much as technology changes and we're going to adapt to the change of technology, we still really need to feel grounded in experiences, real life experiences, and also global scope. And I know that not everybody travels that all the time or that much or isn't interested in it, or, there's so many different ways, but we really need to include that global scope because we have a global society. There are just so many ways to access it. And so that is part of modern education. And I would love to talk about that with you. We also have resources, of course. So I have created a tech starter kit, a kindergarten to fourth grade conversation resource, and a poetry curriculum connection called Postcards from the Inside Out. So I'll share more of that as we continue on, and then also gift cards. So if you're looking to gift a teacher or a parent, that this would be a great gift to get involved with getting to know their child in a different way, which is having a global scope with digital mentors and creating new conversation prompts. And then coming soon, I'm always creating things. There's one called Growth, Personal Development, and Mindset. These all have 30 different lessons in them. They'll be coming out soon. But then also Impact, Innovation, and Development. So thinking about business, sustainability, all of that with policy, and all that is coming with change. And we can do this with kids. Like, I know that that sounds like it's too hard for my 8-year-old, but it's really not to just have like a 5-minute video intro look of like how we use AI for architecture. Just as like one quick example, right? Having the ability to talk about these things is going to really help your child think about complex topics and critically think about them. And then the other one, final one, is balance, reality, and scope of opportunities. So this is just another example of having digital mentors to think about who they are, what they've worked for, what their skills are, what they're interested in learning. There's so many parts to us. And then balancing that with reality. We can't just like wish something just because there's AI. We can't just wish we're famous and create famous content, right? We need to grow with what this looks like with reality. So yeah, thinking about reality and then actual scope of opportunities of what we're interested in and what we can apply ourselves for. So keep this in mind. And now I'll just go into more detail of each one. Okay, so the global conversations I've talked about quite a bit, but with this, it includes 30 videos. And like I've said, it gives you a routine. So I'm just going to share the video to give you an idea of being able to learn from somebody. And I'll just preface this before we start the video because I didn't create these videos to entertain you. Like, we don't go through life being constantly entertained. Like, oh, this person deserves to entertain me, and this person should entertain me. Like, not everything is like a scrolling on your phone, like dopamine, 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 right? Like, I'm a firm believer as well, besides just having global competency for our global scope, of being able to learn from somebody that you don't know the outcome from. Right? So I need, as a person, to be able to give somebody 5 minutes of my time to see what I can learn from them. 5 minutes is not that much, right? And sometimes you don't get all of this information, what I'm giving you of these videos. There is a lot of information of just people talking, but not everything's going to stick, and that's okay. But as a teacher, you really need to model, right? Model that you're paying attention and that your students can pay attention to learn from someone in 5 minutes. And the more that they practice that skill of learning from someone in 5 minutes, the more prepared they are going to be to do that themselves from someone else. So these videos are going to encourage them to ask questions, encourage them to pay attention, encourage them to find similarities and differences, encourage them to think bigger of, how that could change and, all these different ways that critical thinking impacts us. But know that these videos are not to entertain you. They are to open your scope and awareness and your ability to communicate. Okay, so let's take a look at the video.
Hi everybody, my name is Nina and today Miss Paige asked me to make a little video about myself and my country. Let's get started. So, I come from a really small country. in Europe called Slovenia. Slovenians believe that Slovenia is shaped like a chicken. And let me tell you, every time that I've told this fact to a person that does not live in Slovenia, they think it just looks like a normal country shape. It just doesn't look like a chicken, but us Slovenians apparently do think that it looks like a chicken. So, first task of the day, Google a picture of Slovenia or look on the map of Slovenia and tell me if it looks like a chicken or not, because I would love to know. The capital of Slovenia is Ljubljana. The highest mountain in Slovenia is called Triglav, and it's just a little bit above 2,000 meters high. So it takes like 2 days to climb to the top. Slovenia also has a little bit of seaside, so we have a couple of kilometers by the sea, and the beaches here are not as pretty, but it's all that we have, and we love them and appreciate them. This may be my favorite, is 80% of the whole land is covered with forests. So everywhere you go, you can basically see nature, trees, leaves. It's just really pretty and good for the environment, and we love that. So I love going on walks, especially with my dogs, to watch the sunsets, and it's just amazing. We also experience all 4 seasons of the year. So we have snowy winters, we have flowers in the spring, we have really hot summers, and we also have awesome fall time. Let me tell you, right now it's fall and everything is orange and red and yellow. And I love jumping on crunchy leaves. And I bet some of you do too. So if you do, raise those hands up. I know, we love crunchy leaves. The thing that I don't like about Slovenia, actually, the people. I know, let me explain. Um, I believe, especially the older generations in Slovenia, are not as nice to foreign people, and they are greedy and selfish and just, I don't know. And I believe that is because of their whole lifetime, because they fought in wars, they had to fight for the independence of our country, and our country back in the day was really poor. So it was really hard to grow up in this country, but right now it's fine. The younger people are nicer than the older people, so it's becoming nicer. So that's great. Well, after camp, Paige and I actually met up in Bled. Bled is a town in Slovenia, and it has this huge lake that has a little island in the middle. And on the island is a church, and on the side of the lake is a cliff, and on the cliff there's a castle. I know, right out of a fairy tale. So, second task, Google a picture of Blade and just look at how pretty it is, because it's amazing. Paige and I had a little picnic and we ate a traditional dessert called Bleska kremšnita. So after we ate our little dessert, Paige unfortunately had to leave me, and I believe she went to Postojna Cave, which is one of the biggest touristy things to do around Slovenia. And it's the biggest cave that we have, and there's a little train that goes inside of the cave, and it's this whole tour that you can do. And in that cave is this little animal that's a mixture between a lizard and a fish and a snake, and I just don't know. It's called a človeška ribica, which translates to human fish. So Google human fish and see if it pops up. Yeah, I believe it's only been seen in Slovenia. If you want to visit Slovenia, you are so welcome to, and you can call me. I will take you on a tour by myself and show you the country. So I decided that we're gonna have some fun, and I'm gonna teach you how to introduce yourself in Slovenian. So, Živijo, jaz sem Nina. I know, simple. So hi is translated to Živijo. So you're gonna say Živijo. For I am blank, it's jaz, sem, and then your name. I know, simple. So let's do it all again. One, two, three. Julia. Ja jsem Nina. Good job, you did great. I hope you enjoyed this video that I made. I wish you all the best time right now. I hope everybody is healthy and safe. I love you all. Have a great time. Bye.
Okay, so that is Nina, and you can see just from this short video how open she is, right? Of talking about who she is and her experiences. There's things that we can relate to, and things that we could talk about generationally that are different would just be the topic of technology, right? Like, even if we don't go into the history of Slovenia, there are these talking points of how different generations think differently. Okay, there's just so many ways that we think differently. And so you can see from this video that you can go into conversation about, and depending on how old the students are, of course, if they're older, they can watch the whole thing and categorize the information and you can talk about it in that way. But if they're younger, you might do it like part by part. So how did she introduce herself? How do we introduce ourselves, right? Where is she from? Let's find it on a map. Where are we on a map, right? And you can chunk it however your class needs that. But it's also okay to like learn and watch a video and not know everything, right? And then you can also learn how other people have different comprehension than you. So some things stick with us and some things don't, right? And then you're going to connect that to curriculum of how we elaborate what we know through our comprehension of reading or writing or math, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that's just a quick look, and that's available for K-8 students, teachers, and parents, really. It's like a tool for all of you. And then we have the Meaningful Conversations with Children Blueprint, Vocabulary Basics. I've talked about this already, but having that K4 scope for parents and teachers to have that academic and practical scope. So we talk about things like cognitive development, and that includes social devotional development, includes curriculum and reflection to support you with everything from the curriculum you see here. It's all organized, and you can just take, keywords if they need to be able to give details, then they can watch a video and give exact details of what they learned, right? It's going to be very interactive of like the information, then you reflect, and then you try it with a global scale. So here I was in Bali and we were making nasi tumpeng, which is a traditional celebratory dish in Bali specifically. It's not everywhere in Indonesia, but then creating it. And you can see it's such a community event, and it's so colorful and beautiful. And so if they need to be able to say a detail that they learned, then try it. Okay, I see yellow rice. They use yellow rice in the dish, right? And that there's different sections, right? So, and then you can add more detail as you want. Or if you're practicing questions, what did you see and what do you have questions on, right? Maybe they wanted to know, like, what's a special celebration that they do this for? And a wedding would be one example. Okay, so they use flowers. It's just so beautiful. They use banana leaves, and it really shows like um, a different way to show food. We're used to maybe metal platters and this and that, but using natural plants and flowers and everything in the dish is just so beautiful too. So you'll get a lot of practice there. And then, like I've said, there's coaching, speaking, and trainings. I've elaborated more on that. And just like the overall goal is to bring global conversations and curriculum into conversation with teachers, parents, and students from kindergarten to eighth grade. And you've probably seen so far how passionate I am about that. So if you're interested, there is a link to fill out a form to get connected and just learn what your priorities are. And then resources. So there's a tech starter kit, which I will show you really quickly. Okay, so here's the starter kit, and it's more just like a letter from me in the beginning, and then it shows all of the conferences and professional development that I've been through to keep learning about technology and just this era of change. So talking about welcome to the 21st century, we have digital communities. Hello, welcome to the party. We have trending on social media, the customer experience, and looking into the future. So things like how social media can connect to curriculum is something that you may or may not agree with, but hear me out when I explain what this looks like. There is a bridge of how we can relate, these real world experiences to our language and curriculum. The customer experience, I go into some software development conferences I've been to, and what should we be knowledgeable about as adults. And then looking into the future, I talk about innovation and AI and always engaging with reality. So this is a free document. I very highly encourage you to download it and read it, as well as the parents of your students, just to feel prepared as change is coming. And another one on here is the K4 video conversation resource. So let me just open that up. This is also free, so I encourage any K4 teacher or parent to download this. It could go higher level, but I just segmented it into grades. But basically, I give you a video link and then I give you the topic to think about. So in these links, you could go to Thailand, you could go to Bali, you can go to Australia, you can go to Morocco, and in these, I go to different places of changing casita is a casa in Spanish. So thinking about different places that I've lived. And then music, I heard a lot of live music when I was studying in Italy. So yeah, just bringing like these are all just real world experiences created by me, but then having different topics. So the Lantern Festival in Thailand was about letting go. And so topics of letting go of like things that bother us or things that, we're working through, we can give symbolism to with the lantern of lighting it and acknowledging it and then letting it go. And there's just so much to that experience that you'll see through the video, but just really bringing to light that sometimes you can observe something and then you have deeper thoughts and beliefs than you realized before. So this will be helpful to start that conversation through videos. And then the final resource here is Postcards from the Inside Out. So this is a poetry document written by me from the last 10 years of traveling and just, sharing small moments. So let me show you what that looks like. Okay, so these are just small moments. It's a $10 document, but it can connect to so many moments that connect to curriculum of perspective, but also just like a perspective for your child's point of view and relating to something bigger from real world experience. So I broke it down into three different parts. It's called the real world, the filter world, and the inner world. And I give you some thoughts and things to think about with these topics. So, for example, with the real world, the theme is raw travel experiences, discomfort, growth through immersion in unfamiliar places. Topics might include language barriers, culture shock, missed flights, or lost plans. Learning through discomfort, moments of awe and presence, and then, always encouraging you to reflect and add to what I've created. So through discomfort, I've gotten to places of complete awe, and that is how life goes, right? There's no clear route and map that we should be taking, but these are helpful to bring up different topics of experiences. So there's a lot of poems and reflections to think about. I'll just share one other part of the poetry of the filter world because as teachers and parents, so I encourage this for both parties, but having that conversation of social media and what this really could mean, deeper level conversation. So the theme could be contrast between reality and how we curate life online, reflections on identity, projection, image, and perception. And then topics might include photos versus feelings, expectations versus reality, social media aesthetics, self-image and performance, and then comparing versus connecting. And then what topics can you add again, right? So this picture I took and it's obviously filtered. And so what this picture represents is so much. I mean, it's just one image, but it's like you don't know how I'm actually feeling in this photo. I look pretty chill and relaxed, but you don't know that, right? Because you were not with me on that day to know what I was doing and what I was thinking and feeling. But we take this image and then I think for children, because they haven't had so much exposure to this, that they create all the stories in their mind of who I am and what I do and all this stuff. And we actually should hold back on those quick judgments or hold back on those stories without asking those deeper questions like we're talking about with conversation. So I encourage you, depending on, the age of your students, to just be open about talking about things that could confuse our reality of what it looks like and what it actually is. So that's a resource for you as well. Again, that's just a summary of everything that we've talked about. And staying connected. Okay, so there's a lot of different ways. I've created so many different platforms to connect with so many different people. These links are also in the video description. So Expat Ed has Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, Pinterest, a private Facebook group, and as of recently, a Substack. So they're all a little bit different. The Instagram is the first account that I started. And so that's through experiential learning and through thought processes of conversations that you can consider with yourself, with your coworkers and just with your students. TikTok has just turned into a mix of everything. YouTube is trainings like this one with travel videos. LinkedIn is more about AI, education, leadership, business, and mindset. So if you are looking for that extra support, like I said, of continued learning, I would recommend following Expat Education. And I guess that's just based on my first name and last name, Paige Schaefer, the person behind Expat Ed. And then Pinterest is more about creative lifestyles and ideas. And then the private Facebook group is just monthly updates to keep up with. And then the Substack, this is new. So I'm just trying some like simple thought processes to think about. And finally, I just want to say thank you so much for coming to this training to get involved in figuring out how you can thrive as a student teacher. There's going to be so much, and I realize that. So I hope that this training was, expansive in a way of how you can grow and all the ways that you can be an authentic student teacher to connect with your class and also find your resources. There's so many resources now that connect to digital teacher communities, but also just really valuable resources based on years of experience. So I encourage you to connect with us along the way. And again, thank you so much. The world is a beautiful place and we have a lot to talk about. I look forward to connecting with you through Expat Ed. Ciao for now.